A flood of voter rights lawsuits have been filed across the country ahead of the midterms. There are currently 96 active lawsuits in 26 states, including Washington, D.C. The latest being the Beaumont, Texas chapter of the NAACP filing a suit accusing Republican appointed poll workers of intimidating and discriminating against Black voters during the early voting period. The Department of Justice will send election monitors to 64 locations today to ensure compliance with voter access laws and to prevent intimidation and interference. And many officials say vigilance is needed to protect Black voting rights across the country. So here to talk more about this is Gerald Griggs. He is the 13th president of the Georgia NAACP. Listen, thanks for joining us now, because I know it's probably a busy day for you.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about which cases and what cases the NAACP is following closely. And do you think that you're going to hear cases of voter intimidation today?
Well, we're hopeful that we will not, but we are robustly monitoring all of the states. I'm currently in Georgia. I'm president of the Georgia State Conference, and National NAACP is also here. And so we are monitoring all of the elections around the country, but keenly watching, of course, elections here in Georgia and around the South. As you said, we have active cases all over the country, but we are mainly focused on Georgia and Texas for our voter intimidation issues, and we will be filing suit if we hear of anything.
So, in Georgia, though, as you point out, I mean, I think there was sort of a number of laws that were passed after the last election that, became sort of part of the national conversation. And some of the bits and pieces people were sort of surprised about. Oh, you can't bring water to people who are waiting in line, stuff like that. It's a very important race, or a very important election in Georgia. It could determine, the way this country goes. Black voters also form the backbone of the Democratic electorate. Has the race between Senator Warnock and Herschel Walker changed the landscape at all for Black voters in the state? You have two prominent African-American candidates here.
No, I don't think it's changed the backbone of the electorate here in Georgia. We've always been keenly aware of the issues that affect African Americans in this state. And of course, as NAACP, we're nonpartisan. So we see both candidates doing robust outreach to the African American community. But the first and foremost thing that they have to remember is African Americans are concerned about their voting rights. They're concerned about policy changes around police accountability, protecting reproductive rights, and also criminal justice reform. So whichever candidate hits those issues will be elected by the electorate here in Georgia. And here in Georgia, where there are 2.2 million registered African Americans with robust early vote turnout, we expect that those issues will be high on the minds of voters as they go to the polls. Both Reverend Warnock and Herschel Walker have done outreach throughout the state to the African American community, but I think African Americans will go with an individual who spends a majority of their time in Georgia addressing the needs of Georgia, and not individuals that are coming and parachuting in a election that doesn't speak to the needs of Georgians.
Every election, we talk about African American voters, how important this voting bloc is. What are they interested in? And increasingly, though, the conversation is, don't make assumptions about Black voters. They do not all vote the same. And one of the things that you're kind of pointing out to me is that, yes, it is about the issues.
Absolutely. African-American voters are one of the most educated voter bases in the country, especially in Georgia. They are keenly aware of what's happening in Georgia, the threats to the democracy in Georgia, and they speak to Georgia-specific issues. Of course, African-Americans are not a monolith. We don't typically vote just because of a D or an R. We vote on the issues. And in Georgia, the main issues are threats to our voting rights. Of course, the inflation and the economy, and also protecting and investing in Black communities and Black education. So those are issues that any candidate in Georgia is going to have to speak to make sure they get a lion's share of the African-American vote.
This is kind of interesting to me that, you've reiterated over and over again that when it comes to Georgia voters, you better be doing something for Georgia. But what we've seen kind of across the country is many of these state races, if you will, have become nationalized. It's really about whether you are in favor of President Biden or whether or not, you long for the Trump years. That's not happening in Georgia?
Absolutely not. Georgia sent a message in 2020 and 2021 that the race was about Georgia. In 2022, the race will be about Georgia. You know, there are a lot of national figures that come from outside of Georgia that don't have the lay of the land in Georgia. You know, rural Georgia and urban Georgia are different with different issues, and they are state specific issues. So they're not so much concerned about the presidency right now. What they're concerned about is tabletop issues that affect their everyday life, whether that's the gas prices, whether that's the rising costs of food, whether that's housing insecurity, and of course, their voting rights. You know, we were ground zero for voter suppression with SB 202. Georgians are concerned about protecting their voting rights and having police accountability. Georgia had the largest civil rights demonstration during 2020 for George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. We are still concerned about protecting the least of these, and those are issues that Georgian voters are going to take to the polls this morning.
Gerald Griggs, thanks for taking some time to talk to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.